Hello, world. And as Brian might say, welcome to our lovely listeners. But Brian has caught a bug and he will be back in full force next week. And speaking of forces, I have something to share. Our podcast is also like a force of its own in the space because for the first time ever, our podcast, PG.Biz, is up for an award as the best in its class and even more importantly, the best of British. So I'll have those details for you later on in the show and in the show notes so you can cast your vote. Because of course, you're going to cast your vote for us because that's why you came here. You're here at PG.Biz. And moving on from the best podcast, maybe one of the best guests, because certainly one of my favorite people in the industry. I am delighted to be chatting today with Faith Price. She is Director of Growth Marketing at DoubleDown Interactive, where she manages the UA team, ASO, ad monetization, all of it. So a lot that she is doing and a lot that we can learn from. So I'll start off right here, Faith. Just great to have you.
Thanks, Peggy. I am so happy to be chatting with you again. Welcome back. I know you have been doing a lot of traveling, and it was great to meet up with you in person at MAU.
Absolutely. I can only say the same. It was so great. They're like, hey, would you host a fireside with Faith at MAU? And I'm like, hell yeah. Cut me in. And that's exactly what we did. And the conversation, I have to say, will continue. It's continuing here. And my spidey sense sort of tells me that what you're doing now is even more exciting than what you did before because you are full funnel now. You're where the growth is, the focus is. But again, with great power comes great responsibility. How are you dealing with it?
It's certainly been, I think, somewhat of a challenge to get up to speed on everything. But a lot of it is just excitement about being able, as you said, to work with the full funnel, user acquisition, we get users into the game. ASO, SEO helps with that. Retention, bringing users back through paid channels, and now working with the team that's responsible for like push email, social media. Now that we have the users in the game, how do we keep them engaged in building communities and keep them as excited about the game as we are?
So much there, so many different reasons to have you back. But I will stick to the first one because you are my go-to for all things related to soft launch. Because if everything starts out really well, the idea is everything will continue and it will grow and it will just be a great game and a great experience and pay off in the end. But the irony is that it's soft launch, right? But it's probably getting to feel like it's harder than ever.
That is very apt. I think that what we continue to see is companies throughout, like all of the different verticals in the industry, recognizing that the old methodologies don't work, but also like the old sort of tried and true. I remember we would throw around like it takes 20 tries at a game launch to get a successful game, or 1 in 20 games will be successful. And I think the challenge now is who can afford to put out 20 games into soft launch to find that one success. I won't go over the statistics. We did that at MAU, so if people are interested, they could go back and look at the recording for our MAU session. But the day that we had our session, Voodoo released information that said that they are going down to 4 game launches a year, which if you're familiar with Voodoo, right? I mean, they made a huge name for themselves in the hyper-casual business. We're one of the leading hyper-casual titles. And they've said, you know what? No, now we have to go with more of a hybrid style game, a game that has more content to it, that gets the user deeper in the funnel, that keeps them in the game longer. So what we're seeing is that companies have to not just evolve how are they doing soft launches, but how are they thinking about games? Like what games are they actually going to produce and what will work for the current marketing environment?
And you bring up a great point, which is also the genre, right? I'm talking to marketers who are like, yeah, we're in casual, but we're looking at hybrid casual. Then you've got people at hyper casual who are like, yeah, we're looking to go into casual. I've talked to people in mid-core. They want to make casual games. I mean, it's great to be cross-pollinating, but it's certainly more than just saying, oh, I'm going to switch my genre.
I think the reality is that the more niche your game is, while you used to be able to go out and find those people, now you can't. And so that's driving a lot of this conversation about, the hybrids, right? Like the hyper casual. I've been talking with people about some of the mid core or the core games, and you it's really difficult and really expensive to launch them and be successful. And so people are thinking about, well, how can I appeal to a larger audience? But you're right, like that would be a new skill of sorts for a game dev team. And everybody spent years sort of perfecting the match three or the hyper casual or the mid core. And so now we have to relearn sort of like how do we build other types of games that feature your mechanics you like, but have a much wider audience appeal.
Let's talk about that change. I mean, we talked about it at Mao. Everything's changed. You brought some amazing research as well to prove it. It was just like this dramatic drop in the number of new games. So we just have to cope with that, right?
I think it really does come down to working more closely with the product development team and making sure that there's an understanding of who the audience is. I think previously, sometimes games would go out and be like, well, we'll find out who our audience is once we're in soft launch. It's really difficult to do that now. It's very expensive to do that now. And I think the other challenge around it is like, how long can you build a soft launch plan that will allow you to get the information you need in a shorter amount of time? We've done more staged soft launches. So going out for a short amount of time, pulling back, making changes, going out for a short amount of time, pulling back, making changes, taking a look at that. And then also when you're looking at, well, how do I go from soft launch to worldwide launch? Recognizing that worldwide launch might not be what it used to be in the past, which was a huge spike in all of your user acquisition. In fact, I remember when I was at a previous company and we had a really considerably large games coming out, and looking at the patterns we had over multiple large releases, like the most installs you would ever get in a week or a month would be the first time when you went into worldwide launch. Like that would be your largest install cohort. And the reality is that's not true anymore because it costs too much to make that big splash. So I would say that there is now a breaking down of the demarcation between soft launch and worldwide launch.
I didn't want to interrupt you there, but you had me thinking, that's exactly the key question, is something around the timeline. So can you be a little bit more concrete? We know the timelines are shorter because the resources are shorter. But what does that mean? Tell me about these phases, like the numbers of weeks.
So that's a really challenging question because that's going to be very dependent on your game, where it is in its development cycle and what your metrics look like, especially things like user retention. But previously, when I would look at games in soft launch, we would see them in soft launch for a year potentially, running at a lower spend in tier 3 countries and some like tier 2s, but they would be in soft launch essentially until they could get the game to a state where they wanted to go worldwide. And if that took a year, if that took 2 years, you could get cheap enough installs generally to support some level of spend. And so now that's very compressed. So I see more like games only being in soft launch for a couple of months and then pushing out into worldwide. And unfortunately, some of them, like, you will see like a big push into worldwide and then a couple months later, immediate drop off in UA and eventually dwindling down quite a bit. And so so the question then is, how much time, how much time can you afford to spend in soft launch to make sure everything is working? And so that you can get those LTV and retention curves. And so I think that's the challenge, right? That's sort of the compression. And that's with a lot of the, especially, a lot of the challenges around cost is balancing the need to get a game out, which of course is always the driving force of us, of the studio execs, and the need to get enough data to be able to accurately predict LTV, which is what marketing wants, right? And so that's part of the rethinking is how can you more accurately predict or model the game metrics on a very short timeline.
Which is probably a little bit of a high five to DoubleDown because they've just given you that. That's your remit. You get to watch the full funnel, not because you're just really good at it, Faith, but because you have that visibility into the data. That's what I'm hearing here, that is the way to structure it in order to make this work.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the, like, where UA teams need to work more closely with the game development teams, right? To have that conversation to say, how can we be collaborating together? How can we provide feedback from what we're seeing in terms of how the user, what the user is reacting to in messaging and creative, and the game team can provide, like, okay, well, here's, where the metrics are, here's what the metrics are, and then how can we work together to improve them? We have to get rid of some of those silos that you could have previously and recognize that it's just got to be more of a collaboration together.
Let's talk about the data because there's not much of it. Marketers have to be smarter. We talked about the shorter phase. They also have to be smarter. And they have to look at the data differently. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about how they can make quicker decisions around the metrics that are the most important.
This is where we talked about the demarcation, like between soft launch and worldwide launch potentially going away, like the lines blurring. It used to be you went out to tier 3, then you went out to, and maybe a little tier 2, and then eventually you'd go into your target market. To get the data you need to validate that the game is in the amount of time and with the spend, the required spend, to validate that the game is investable, you might actually have to go into your target market. It used to be, no, don't go into your target market until you're ready to go worldwide because you're going to get this huge bump for worldwide. You're going to, potentially get featuring this, all of this around it. But what we're starting to see now is more people doing a soft launch where they're going to, that's in what's going to be their main worldwide geo, because the data that we used to get, from tier 3s isn't necessarily as useful anymore, and it's more expensive, right? So if you're going to have to be paying higher CPIs anyway, going into the target geo might be what you have to do. It's interesting to me that so the Play Store, you can go into your target geo and be in like a beta, and therefore get information and but the ratings won't count. So once you put out your sort of your final worldwide launch client, the ratings won't go against you. So if you still have a game that has some stuff to be worked out, people are aware it's a beta.
So it does make sense to say, hey, let's just do beta in our target market. We'll get the data we want. It's relevant. It's our audience. It's going to be useful. It's going to help us make a better game. In the end, it's going to pay off.
You just have to be willing to sacrifice your expectations that were based on the way the world was 3 years ago.
And staying with the data for a moment, to what extent is it important to understand what everybody else is doing? How important is it understanding that? How much effort should I put into that? Or how much effort do you put into that?
We do a hefty amount, I would say, of competitor research, market research, before we create any plans, before we do any estimates out to the leadership team on, what do we think this is going to cost and what do we think we will get for it. And so I would say for us, that's something we work on months in advance of when we actually think the game is going to be in soft launch. And I think that's one of the sort of benefits of, being able to have good relationships with your media partners, because they're also, we talk about like talking with other colleagues in the industry, other people who are doing soft launches from the game side, but the media channels, those are also a huge component in your plan and in the success of your title. So we have a lot of conversations with our media partners as well to understand what's going on in the industry and being able to get that data and be able to make those estimates. And then, of course, you launch them and you try to validate all those estimates. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
But the thread going through all of this is really, it's much more collaborative than it used to be. You talk about there needing to be more collaboration between marketing and product. Tell me how you encourage this, and maybe encouraging everybody to think in this way, maybe something that you have found together to boost installs and conversions. So proving that teamwork works.
I'm really lucky. We have a game development team that sits in-house in Seattle. And so we're able to have a lot of conversations from around the development of what ideas are coming down the pipeline all the way through launch. And so there's a couple of times where we get to sort of speak into the process. And one of the questions that we get asked is by the game team when they have all of their ideas for their pitches are, what do we think from a marketing standpoint? What do we think the viability of the game is? What do we think the challenges are? And so we will be able to have conversations that say, this is a really great idea, but it's going to be really expensive. So here's what we think the costs will be. And based on that, is it, you have 20 ideas. These ones cost a lot. These ones cost less. Or, these ones cost less, but we don't think the average revenue is going to be very high. So part of it is, having that conversation early on about what do we think will work. Part of it is having conversations as they get near the end about, okay, well, what's the marketing hook around this, right? Like you've got a great mechanic, you've got a good theme, but what can we use to tell a story that will make people interested in the game? And so having those conversations, which we did on a game launch last year, was able to help us then develop our creative and to be able to drive lower CPIs, because we were able to work with them to be like, okay, you've got this, but what we really need is this sort of character or this sort of storyline, or, you know, this way to combine the meta game with the mechanic. Like having that conversation and being able to say, you know, like, we need a way to market this to somebody who is not, who doesn't know the game and isn't as in love with it as you are. Really, I think is really key for when you're first going out and trying to get low CPIs.
So it's really about that marketing plus the mechanic and saying, okay, this is a great idea, but this is how you're going to make it better in the sense that it's better performing. You talked about your game launch last year. You talked about the creative. What's a hook that you found together? What was something that you found that worked that maybe you can share?
Sure. And, you know, unfortunately, this was not a game that made it out of soft launch. But when we were working on through soft launch, it really was like working with them to say, okay, we try just the mechanic, that doesn't work. We try just the story, that doesn't work. So, you know, help us put the two together. Because the concept was, right, you appeal to people who just like the mechanic, you appeal to people who just like the theme of the story, but how can you appeal to both of those groups together? And so that's what we had conversations with them about. And part of it came from, you know, us also being able to play the game. I think that's really key too, is give the game, which is what our dev teams have been doing, is giving us the game early on to say, okay, is this interesting? And is there something here you can market? So, you know, I ended up playing through, like, finishing multiple storylines in that game so that I could be able to talk to them about, okay, how can we use this in the marketing? So I think that's been one of the bigger changes in how we collaborate, because that wasn't necessarily, you know, what we did previously.
I was thinking about that because I know a lot of marketers, it's like they didn't really touch that part of it. And there you are being almost collaborative, co-creating in that respect, saying, okay, this is the mechanic. I like this. Here's how we can market it. Another part of that collaboration is not just marketing and product. I don't know if it's a who or a what, but it's also, hey, that big buzzword, AI. How's it working out there at DoubleDown? I mean, is that part of the teamwork now, part of the co-creation? What's going on there?
For us, I think we are still very, I would say, rudimentary in what we use AI for. I know some people have completely embraced it, right? Most people are either it's the savior of everything or it's going to destroy the world, right? We're sort of in the, this could be an interesting tool. Mostly it's a jumping off point, right? So it can be a jumping off point for marketing teams in terms of messaging or ideas on new concepts. For the art team, it's a jumping off point for developing characters and environments and things like that. But that's really where we utilize it. Let's make it part of a brainstorm, the beginning part maybe, and then it adds to everything else we've been brainstorming, and then we can choose what we like from all of the different inputs from people, from AI, and then build on those.
Let's stay with brainstorming and inspiration, because on a personal note, Faith, I have to say, it's something about you. You really inspire me. You have everything aligned to understand human and also data. You recently returned yourself from a trip to the Philippines where you spent time, as we discussed, you know, several remote villages that you were there working with local volunteers on scholarship programs. I mean, help me understand how this aligns with what you do in your professional and your personal growth. I mean, you are a growth marketer, but you're also growing at a very personal level. I think that's exciting and surely has some benefit that you'd like to share.
I love collaboration, and I love that we're in an industry that is, it's competitive, but it's also really collaborative. And so that is for me is sort of the natural springboard to some of the volunteer work I do around helping provide resources, educational resources for other people who don't have the same, don't have the same opportunities, I would say, that we do. What I do in my professional life is it's a lot of organizational meetings and finding resources for different teams and removing obstacles for their success. And so it's so amazing for me when I get to take that to a very different set of circumstances, which in this case was working in the Philippines to help. How do we provide resources for programs for people who need to be able to go to school, elementary school, high school, college? How do we find resources and start programs for, people who don't have work that they can do because they live in a very remote area? I work with a lot of budgets in my job. And so, helping people who've never don't even understand what a budget is or have never had a bank account, because a bank account is something that, wealthy people have. Wealthy meaning somebody who, maybe makes a couple $100s a month. To me, it's just so fulfilling and amazing to get to be able to do that and to be able to see people excited because they get to go to school, right? Like I think of my nieces and nephews who I love very dearly, but they were not nearly as excited about being able to go to school, even if it's like walking 5 or 6 miles to get to that school, as some of the kids that I was able to meet and to chat with.
Obviously, you have a strong character. We've been talking about it. You think about personal growth, you think about professional growth, and also rethinking, games as well. And probably not everybody knows this, but I did a little bit of digging and I was very interested to find, just by accident, you are also a character in a comic book. I saw this. I thought, this is pretty wild. I didn't expect this at all. I just thought, oh, it looks like Faith. And then I looked and clicked it on. It's like, yes, Titanic. Okay, I get it. I love tea. And your ability, your superpower is you drink a few sips of your herbal tea mix and then you can gain a better perspective on any situation. I mean, that is one heck of a superpower. Is that you, Faith?
Just a shout out to Liftoff, their mobile heroes, and a big thank you for them putting me in their comic series. I like to think it is. I certainly hope that that's one of the things that I can bring to the teams I work with, is that perspective. And that's what I really encourage for my teams as well, is to be going out and listening to podcasts and reading articles and, participating in webinars and things like that, because we need to understand, when you understand more about what's going on, whether it's in your industry or just all of the marketplace in general, there's so much more that you can bring. There's such a better perspective that you can have on marketing and on game development and on, communicating messaging, like when we're, crafting an email or a social post to the consumer, having that information, not just being siloed into one specific area, I think just makes everybody better rounded in their roles in both work and I think both in their personal life too.
You have the practical firsthand experience, and true to what you do, Faith, yes, you like to educate the industry. You just educated us now. So thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks, Peggy. It was great, as always, chatting with you.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter at PG.Biz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Anne Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.